My noon-night job at the old train station seemed like easy money until I found a rule book. Rule number 1, never acknowledge the shadows. Rule number 2, if you hear a whistle when no train is scheduled, don't look up. It only gets worse from there. This isn't just a job, it's a test of survival. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I stepped out of my car into the Texas night. August heat still clung to the air, even at 11 p.m., thick and oppressive, carrying with it the smell of dust and creosote from the railroad ties. The Millbrook station stood before me like a relic from another era, its Victorian architecture crumbling at the edges, paint peeling in long strips that reminded me of dead skin. 2 stories of red brick and wrought iron, with tall arched windows that reflected nothing but darkness back at me. I'd taken the job out of desperation more than anything else. 3 months unemployed, bills piling up, my landlord's increasingly aggressive voicemails. When a listing appeared online, night custodian at a historic train station, it seemed almost too good to be true. $12 an hour to basically sit in an empty building and make sure nothing burned down. The interview had been conducted over email, and I'd never even met my employer in person, just exchanged messages with someone named Jay Hartley, who asked very few questions and seemed eager to fill the position immediately. The key was where they'd said it would be, tucked under a loose brick beside the main entrance. The door groaned as I pushed it open, hinges protesting with a sound like someone drawing a breath through broken teeth. Inside, the station smelled of mildew and old wood, with an underlying metallic scent I couldn't quite place. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating high ceilings with exposed beams, a long wooden bench worn smooth by generations of waiting passengers, and a ticket counter with an antique register still sitting on top, coated in decades of dust. The electricity worked, thankfully. I found the light switches and flooded the main waiting area with harsh fluorescent light that flickered and buzzed, casting everything in a sickly yellow-green glow. It wasn't much of an improvement over the darkness. The station had been built in 1897, according to the bronze plaque near the entrance, and it looked like very little had been updated since. No trains had run through here in over 30 years. Not since the line had been rerouted and Millbrook became just another dying small town in the endless Texas prairie. On the ticket counter, I found a manila folder with my name written on it in neat cursive. Inside were various forms, my work schedule, and a single sheet of paper that made my stomach twist the moment I started reading it. Night shift regulations. Read carefully. The title alone was strange. Not duties or responsibilities, but regulations. I settled onto the bench and read through the list, each rule more bizarre than the last. Never acknowledge the shadows. If you see movement in your peripheral vision, ignore it. Do not turn toward it. Do not speak to it. That if you hear a train whistle when no train is scheduled, do not look up. Keep your eyes on the floor until the sound passes. The second-floor offices are off limits between midnight and 4 a.m. Do not enter them under any circumstances. That if you find personal items that don't belong to you, leave them where they are. Do not touch them. Do not move them. Should you hear knocking from inside the walls, tap back twice and move to a different room immediately. The maintenance closet at the end of the Easter platform must remain locked at all times. You do not have a key. You do not need a key. Do not attempt to open this door. That if someone asks you for help boarding a train, apologize politely and tell them you cannot assist. Do not elaborate. Do not ask questions that at exactly 2:47 a.m. you will hear footsteps crossing the main waiting area. Do not investigate their source. Remain in the office until they cease. Never, under any circumstances, answer the telephone in the station master's office after midnight. If you see a woman in a blue dress on the platform, leave the station immediately and do not return until dawn. I read through the list 3 times, waiting for the punchline. For some indication, this was a hazing ritual for new employees. But the paper was old, yellowed at the edges, and the type looked like it had come from an actual typewriter. At the bottom, in that same neat cursive, someone had written, "These rules exist for your protection. Previous employees who disregarded them did not complete their shifts. Take this seriously. Previous night custodian, 2019 inch." This list was 6 years old, and apparently, there had been enough turnover that they just kept a standardized copy for each new hire. That thought didn't comfort me. I tried to laugh it off, told myself it was some weird attempt at atmospheric tourism, maybe preparing the station for ghost tours or something. Small towns did stuff like that. Tried to drum up interest with manufactured mystery. But my hands were shaking slightly as I folded the paper and put it back in the folder. The rest of my orientation materials were mundane by comparison. I was to check all windows and doors hourly, maintain cleanliness in the public areas, report any damage or issues to the facilities manager via email. Standard custodial work. There was a small office behind the ticket counter that would serve as my base, equipped with a desk, a chair, a mini fridge, and a coffee maker that looked older than I was. I spent the first hour familiarizing myself with the layout. The main waiting area was large, easily 50 feet across, with a ticket counter along one wall and restrooms on the opposite side. Double doors led out to the eastern platform, while a single door opened to the western platform. A staircase near the back led up to the second floor, which housed administrative offices according to the faded directory still hanging on the wall. I didn't go up there. It wasn't midnight yet, but Rule 3 had lodged itself firmly in my mind. By midnight, I'd settled into the office with a book and my phone, determined to treat this like any other night shift. The station was silent except for the buzz of the fluorescent lights and the occasional groan of old wood settling. I tried to focus on reading, but my attention kept drifting to the doorway, to the dark spaces beyond my limited circle of light. That's when I first felt it. The sensation of being watched. It started as a prickling at the back of my neck, that primitive awareness that predates human civilization, the instinct that kept our ancestors alive when predators lurked in the darkness. I looked up from my book, scanning the waiting area visible through the office doorway. Nothing, just shadows and old furniture and the steady tick of a clock on the wall that I hadn't noticed before. But the feeling persisted, grew stronger. My eyes were drawn to the far corner of the waiting room, where the fluorescent light didn't quite reach. Was there something there? A deeper darkness within the dark, a shape that didn't quite match the geometry of the room? I leaned forward, squinting, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Rule number 1 echoed in my mind. Never acknowledge the shadows. I jerked my eyes away, heart suddenly pounding. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. Old building, weird shadows, overactive imagination fueled by that ridiculous list of rules. But I didn't look back at that corner for the rest of the hour. At 1 a.m., I did my first rounds, walking through the station with my flashlight, even though the overhead lights were on. Everything seemed normal, or as normal as a decrepit train station could be. The platforms were empty, silver rails gleaming in the moonlight, stretching away into darkness in both directions. The restrooms were exactly as I'd left them. The windows were secure, the doors locked. When I returned to the office, I noticed something that made my breath catch in my throat. On the desk, beside my book, sat a pocket watch I'd never seen before. It was old, tarnished silver with an engraved cover, and it was ticking softly in silence. The chain was coiled neatly beside it, as if someone had carefully placed it there while I was gone. Rule number 4. If you find personal items that don't belong to you, leave them where they are. Do not touch them. Do not move them. I stood in the doorway for a long minute, staring at the watch, my mind racing through possibilities. Had I somehow missed it before? Had it been there all along, and I just hadn't noticed? But I cleared the desk when I arrived, moved my things around. There was no way I could have overlooked something sitting right in the middle of the workspace. Someone else had been here. While I was doing my rounds, someone had entered the office and left this watch. But the station was supposed to be empty. The doors were locked. I was alone. The watch continued its steady ticking, each second marked with perfect precision. I wanted to pick it up, to examine it, to understand where it had come from. But I remembered the rule. I remembered that handwritten note. Previous employees who disregarded them did not complete their shifts. I left the watch where it was, backed away from the desk, and spent the next hour standing in the doorway of the office, watching both the pocket watch and the waiting area beyond. The watch kept ticking. Nothing else moved. But that feeling of being watched never went away, and I couldn't shake the certainty that something in this station was testing me, seeing if I would follow the rules. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., the sunrise painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and pink, I practically ran to my car. The pocket watch was still on the desk, still ticking away the seconds. I didn't look back as I drove away, but in my rearview mirror, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing in one of the second-floor windows, watching me leave. I had 4 more nights to get through. 4 more nights in Millbrook Station. And I was already starting to understand that the rules weren't suggestions. They were survival instructions. I didn't sleep well that first day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pocket watch sitting on the desk, heard its relentless ticking echoing through my dreams. When my alarm went off at 9 p.m., I seriously considered not going back. The memory of that sensation, that overwhelming certainty of being watched by something I couldn't see, made my skin crawl even in the safety of my apartment. But I needed the money, and some stubborn part of me refused to be scared away by shadows and an old watch. I'd survived 1 night. I could survive 4 more. The second night, I arrived early, parking under the same flickering streetlight that barely pushed back the darkness surrounding the station. This time, I come prepared. I had a thermos of strong coffee, extra batteries for my flashlight, and my phone fully charged with a portable charger in my bag. I'd also done some research during the day, looking up the history of Millbrook Station, trying to find some rational explanation for the rules and the strange atmosphere. What I'd found hadn't been comforting. The station had a history. All right. In 1923, a fire had broken out in the administrative offices on the 2nd floor, killing the station master and 2 clerks who'd been working late. The cause was never determined, though some newspaper articles suggested arson. In 1956, a woman named Eleanor Vance had thrown herself in front of the evening train, dying instantly on the eastern platform. Witnesses said she'd been wearing a blue dress. Rule number 10 suddenly made a lot more sense, and I really wished it didn't. There were other incidents too, scattered through the decades. A maintenance worker who disappeared in 1972, last seen entering the station for a night shift. A homeless man found dead inside the building in 1989, apparently from a heart attack, though the article mentioned that his face had been frozen in an expression of absolute terror. The station had been closed to rail traffic in 1994, but it had remained in use as a historical building and occasional event space until about 5 years ago, when the last caretaker had quit abruptly, citing unacceptable working conditions. I was starting to think unacceptable was putting it mildly. The station looked even more foreboding in the darkness of my second night. Shadows seemed to pool in places they hadn't before, and the windows reflected my flashlight beam back at me like dozens of watching eyes. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar smell of mildew and metal greeting me like an old, unwelcome friend. The pocket watch was gone from the office desk. I'd expected that, hoped for it even, but its absence left a clean circle in the dust that made me uneasy. Something had taken it away. Something had been here during the day, moving through the station while it sat empty and locked. I settled in, trying to establish a routine. Check the time, do a round, return to the office, repeat. Keep busy, stay alert, follow the rules. Don't think too much about what might be lurking in the dark corners. Don't wonder what happened to the previous employees who hadn't taken the regulation seriously. The first 2 hours passed without incident. I was starting to relax, starting to think that maybe the first night had been a fluke my imagination working overtime in a creepy new environment. Then, at exactly 1:37 a.m., I heard the whispers. They started so softly that at first I thought they were just the wind outside, or maybe the old building settling. But as I sat very still in the office, listening, the sounds resolved into something unmistakably human. Voices, multiple voices, speaking in hushed tones just beyond the range of comprehension. They seemed to be coming from inside the walls themselves, moving through the building's infrastructure like water through pipes. I stood up slowly, every muscle tense, and moved to the doorway. The whispers were louder out in the main waiting area, echoing off the high ceilings. I couldn't make out words exactly, but there was a rhythm to it, a cadence that suggested conversation. Question and answer, back and forth, an endless dialogue taking place in the spaces between the walls. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and started recording. I needed evidence, needed something to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The microphone picked up the sounds, translating them into visible waveforms on the screen. Real, measurable, not just in my head. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I realized with growing horror that they were moving, tracking along the walls from the eastern side of the building toward where I stood. Getting closer, the voices multiplied, overlapping, creating a cacophony of soft sounds that made my head ache. Then I heard it, clear as day, cutting through all the other whispers. My name, David, the voice said, soft and feminine and impossibly sad. David, can you help me? Every instinct screamed at me to answer, to ask who was there, to offer assistance. But rule number 7 burned in my memory. If someone asks you for help boarding a train, apologize politely and tell them you cannot assist. Do not elaborate. Do not ask questions. This wasn't exactly someone asking about boarding a train, but the principle felt the same. Don't engage. Don't acknowledge. Don't let them know you can hear them. I backed into the office, my breathing shallow, and closed the door. The whispers continued outside, pressing against the walls, searching. That sad voice called my name twice more, each time with more desperation, more longing. I sat at the desk with my hands over my ears, eyes squeezed shut, reciting multiplication tables in my head to block out the sounds. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the whispers faded. Silence returned to the station, heavy and expectant. I waited another 10 minutes before I dared open the office door and look out. The waiting area was empty, but on the old wooden bench, sitting exactly in the center, was a small leather suitcase I'd never seen before. It was old-fashioned, the kind with brass corners and a fabric interior, probably from the 1920s or 30s. The handle was worn smooth from years of use. Rule number 4, don't touch it. Don't move it. I did my next round walking as far from the bench as possible, keeping my eyes averted from the suitcase. When I returned to the office, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the wall behind the ticket counter, there was a series of black and white photographs I hadn't paid much attention to before. Historical images of the station in its heyday, crowds of travelers, steam engines pulling in and out. But now, looking closer with my flashlight, I saw something in one of the photos. In the background, barely visible in the grain of the old photograph, was a figure standing on the platform. A woman in a blue dress, her face turned toward the camera, her expression one of infinite sadness. Eleanor Vance. It had to be. The woman who died on the eastern platform in 1956. And in another photograph, dated 1923, showing the grand opening of the station's second-floor offices, I could see faces in one of the upstairs windows. 3 people, looking down at the celebration below. The station master and his 2 clerks, I realized. The ones who'd burned to death in that very room. The station wasn't just haunted by 1 or 2 ghosts. It was haunted by every tragedy that had ever occurred here, every life that had ended within these walls. They were all still here, trapped in the building, repeating their final moments over and over. and they knew I was here too. At 2:47 a.m., exactly as rule number 8 had predicted, I heard the footsteps. They started at the far end of the waiting area, near the eastern platform doors. Slow, measured steps, the sound of heart-soled shoes on the old wooden floor. Step, 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 crossing the room with deliberate purpose. I stayed in the office, door closed, watching through the small window, as absolutely nothing visible caused those sounds. The footsteps crossed the entire length of the waiting area, passed within feet of my door, and continued to the western platform entrance before finally fading away. When they stopped, I released a breath I hadn't known I was holding. My shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool night air. I checked my watch. 2:51 a.m. The footsteps had lasted exactly 4 minutes. The rest of the night dragged by with agonizing slowness. I did my rounds mechanically, checking doors and windows, carefully avoiding the suitcase that remained on the bench and the shadows that seemed to writhe in the corners. The whispers came and went, sometimes loud enough to make out individual words. Help, remember, find me. But I never responded, never acknowledged them. At 4 a.m., according to rule number 3, the second-floor offices became safe again. I didn't have any desire to go up there, but my curiosity was starting to override my fear. What was up there that made it so dangerous between midnight and 4? What happened during those hours? I climbed the stairs slowly, flashlight beam sweeping across peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceilings. The second floor was a long hallway with offices on either side, most of them empty except for the occasional piece of abandoned furniture. At the far end was a larger door with a frosted glass panel that read Station Master in gold lettering. I approached carefully, half expecting something to jump out at me. Through the glass, I could see a desk, filing cabinets, and on the wall, an old rotary telephone. As I watched, the phone began to ring. It was 4:17 a.m., after midnight. Rule number 9, never, under any circumstances, answer the telephone in the station master's office after midnight. The ringing continued, shrill and insistent, echoing down the empty hallway. 5 rings, 10, 15. It didn't stop. Someone or something really wanted that phone answered. I turned and walked away, down the stairs, back to the office. The ringing followed me, audible even on the first floor, until finally, mercifully, it stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something else, a sound that made every hair on my body stand on end. Knocking, from inside the walls. Slow, deliberate knocking, 3 beats at a time. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. Rule number 5. Should you hear knocking from inside the walls, tap back twice and move to a different room immediately. My hand shook as I reached out and tapped the wall beside me. Twice as instructed. The knocking stopped instantly. I didn't wait to find out what happened next. I grabbed my bag and moved to the waiting area, as far from that wall as possible. For the remaining hours of my shift, I sat on the bench, careful not to touch the mysterious suitcase, and watched the eastern sky slowly lighten with the approaching dawn. When 6 a.m. finally arrived, I'd never been so grateful to see the sunrise in my life. But as I gathered my things and prepared to leave, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. On the ticket counter, laid out in a neat line, were 3 items. A conductor's cap from the 1920s, a blue silk scarf, a tarnished railroad worker's badge, more personal items appearing out of nowhere, more pieces of the past bleeding into the present. I left them where they were and walked out into the morning light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the station was trying to tell me something. All these artifacts, these voices, these shadows, they weren't just haunting the building randomly. There was a pattern here, a message I wasn't quite understanding yet. And I had 3 more nights to figure it out, whether I wanted to or not. By the 3rd night, I'd developed a kind of grim determination. Yes, the station was haunted. Yes, there were things happening that defied rational explanation. But I'd survived 2 nights by following the rules, and I convinced myself that as long as I kept following them, I'd be fine. The ghosts, or whatever they were, seemed to operate within certain boundaries. They whispered, they left objects, they knocked and walked and called my name, but they hadn't actually hurt me. That confidence almost got me killed. I arrived at 11 p.m. to find the station exactly as I left it. The 3 items on the ticket counter remained undisturbed, and the suitcase still sat on the bench like a patient traveler waiting for a train that would never come. The building felt different tonight, though. The air was heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. Static electricity raised the hair on my arms as I walked through the waiting area. I brought more supplies this time: a camping lantern for better light, a portable radio to fill the silence, some food to keep my energy up through the long night. I was treating this like what it was, a survival situation. Get through 5 nights, collect my paychecks, and never come back to Millbrook Station again. The first few hours passed in tense quiet. I did my rounds, checked the building, avoided the shadows and the objects in the dark corners where things seemed to lurk. The whispers started around midnight, but they were quieter tonight, more distant. The footsteps came at 2:47 a.m. exactly, crossing the waiting area like clockwork. I was almost getting used to it, which should have been my first warning that something was wrong. At 3:15 a.m., I made a mistake. I was doing my hourly check, walking through the waiting area with my flashlight, when I noticed the door to the western platform standing slightly ajar. I knew I'd locked it during my last round. I distinctly remembered checking it, testing the handle, making sure it was secure. But now it stood open about 6 inches, darkness visible beyond, and a cold breeze was blowing through the gap. I should have left it alone. I should have returned to the office and waited for my shift to end. But the rules didn't say anything about doors being mysteriously opened, and some rational part of my brain insisted there had to be an explanation. Wind, a faulty latch, something mundane. I approached the door and pulled it open fully. The western platform stretched out before me, illuminated by weak moonlight. The railroad tracks gleamed silver, running away into darkness in both directions. And standing at the far end of the platform, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure, a woman in a blue dress. Rule number 10 hit me like a physical blow. If you see a woman in a blue dress on the platform, leave the station immediately and do not return until dawn. But I hesitated, just for a second, just long enough to wonder if I was really seeing what I thought I was seeing. The figure was so far away, and the light was so dim. Maybe it was just a trick of shadows, my tired brain conjuring threats that weren't there. The woman turned to face me. Even at that distance, even in that darkness, I could see her face clearly. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair pinned up in an old-fashioned style. Her blue dress was from another era, cinched to the waist, falling in a long skirt to her ankles. And her expression, her expression was one of such profound sadness that it made my chest ache just looking at her. She raised one hand, beckoning me forward. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear over the pounding of my heart. Every instinct told me to run. Every nerve ending screamed danger. But I was frozen, locked in place by that sad gaze, by the desperate gesture of her outstretched hand. She needed help. She needed something. And despite everything, despite all the rules and warnings, part of me wanted to help her. I took one step onto the platform. The temperature dropped instantly, plummeting from the warm Texas night to something Arctic. My breath came out in white clouds. Frost formed on the metal railing beside me, spreading in crystalline patterns that reflected the moonlight. And the woman in the blue dress smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was hungry. She began walking toward me, her movements smooth and gliding, her feet not quite touching the platform. As she approached, I could see more details that my mind had initially refused to process. Her skin had a grayish tint. Her eyes were empty, black voids that reflected no light. And there was something wrong with her shadow. It moved independently, reaching toward me like grasping fingers. I stumbled backward, breaking whatever spell had held me. The door. I needed to get back through the door, back inside the station, away from her. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing on the wooden platform, and I heard her behind me, moving faster than should have been possible, closing the distance with impossible speed. I crashed through the doorway and slammed the door shut behind me, throwing my weight against it. Something hit the other side hard enough to rattle the frame. The door handle turned under my hand, though I could see through the window that there was nothing on the platform anymore, nothing visible touching the handle. "Let me in, David," a voice whispered through the door. That same sad, feminine voice from the whispers. "Let me in and I can rest. Let me in and it will all be over." My hand was shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. When I finally managed it, I backed away from the door, watching as the handle continued to turn uselessly, as shadows writhed in the gap beneath the door, as something on the other side threw itself against the wood again and again. Then suddenly it stopped. The handle stilled. The shadows retreated. Silence fell over the station like a blanket. I checked my watch. 3:47 a.m. I'd been on a platform for less than 5 minutes, but it had felt like hours. And I'd broken the rule. I'd seen the woman in the blue dress, and instead of leaving immediately, I'd stayed. I'd almost let her reach me. The rest of the night was a nightmare of paranoia and terror. I locked myself in the office and didn't come out, not even to do my rounds. The whispers returned, louder than ever, pressing against the walls, calling my name from every direction. The knocking came too, but this time when I tapped back twice as instructed, it didn't stop. It grew more insistent, spreading through the walls like an infection. Objects began appearing in the office itself. A woman's glove on the desk, a railroad spike on the floor, a child's toy train on the windowsill, each one appearing when I wasn't looking, manifesting out of nothing, filling the small space with artifacts of the past. And through it all, I could hear footsteps on the second floor, not the measured steps that crossed the waiting area at 2:47. These were frantic, running footsteps, racing back and forth across the ceiling above me, accompanied by the smell of smoke that grew stronger with each passing minute. At 4 a.m., a photograph slid under the office door. I picked it up with trembling hands. It showed the station in what looked like the 1970s, and standing in front of the maintenance closet at the end of the eastern platform was a man in work clothes. He was smiling at the camera, one hand resting on the locked door behind him. On the back of the photograph, in faded ink, someone had written, "Jack Morrison, 1972. Last photo before he vanished." Rule number 6. The maintenance closet at the end of the eastern platform must remain locked at all times. You do not have a key. You do not need a key. Do not attempt to open this door. What was in that closet? What had happened to Jack Morrison when he'd opened it? And why was the station showing me this now? I spent the last 2 hours of my shift piecing together what I'd learned. The artifacts appearing around the station weren't random. They belonged to specific people. The station master and clerks from 1923, Eleanor Vance from 1956, Jack Morrison from 1972, the homeless man from 1989, whose photograph I found mixed in with the historical images on the wall. All of them had died here, and all of them were still here, trapped in the building, their spirits unable to move on. But why? What was keeping them here? And more importantly, what did they want from me? As dawn finally broke and I prepared to leave, I found one more item waiting for me. On the ticket counter, placed carefully on top of the conductor's cap and blue scarf and railway badge, was a leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. I opened it and immediately recognized the neat cursive from the rules document. The previous night, custodian. And the journal's final entry was dated March 15th, 2019. "This is my last night," it read. "I figured out what the station wants, why it keeps us here after we die. There's something in the maintenance closet, something that's been feeding on the trapped souls for decades. It grows stronger with each person who dies here, and it's hungry. So hungry. I try to leave, but it won't let me. The rules aren't to protect us from the ghosts. They're to keep us from feeding the thing that holds them here. If you're reading this, if you survive your first few nights, you need to leave and never come back. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't try to help them. You can't save them. You can only become one of them." The entry ended abruptly, the pen trailing off the page, as if the writer had been interrupted mid-sentence. The rest of the pages were blank. I left the station as the sun rose, but this time I didn't feel relief. I felt a growing sense of dread, because I had 2 more nights to survive, and I now understood that the rules weren't just about avoiding the ghosts. They were about avoiding whatever was controlling them. I spent the entire day trying to decide if I should quit. The journal entry from the previous custodian had shaken me badly. Something in the maintenance closet, something feeding on trapped souls. The words kept running through my head, taking on new and more horrifying meanings with each repetition. But I couldn't afford to quit. I'd already spent 2 of my paychecks in my head, allocated every dollar to overdue bills and mounting debt. And besides, I had only 2 nights left. 2 more nights, and I'd never have to see Millbrook Station again. I tried calling a number for my hiring paperwork, hoping to reach Jay Hartley and ask questions about the previous custodian, about what had really happened in 2019. The number was disconnected. I searched for any information about the station's current ownership, about who was actually employing me, but found nothing. It was as if the job had manifested out of nowhere, and I'd walked right into a trap. The 4th night arrived too quickly. I sat in my car outside the station for a full 10 minutes before I could force myself to get out. The building looked different tonight, more menacing. The windows seemed to watch me with malevolent intelligence, and the shadows around the foundation appeared deeper, darker, more substantial than mere absence of light. Inside, the station was chaos. Every artifact that had appeared over the previous nights was now on display. The pocket watch sat on the ticket counter, still ticking. The suitcase remained on the bench, but now it was open, revealing old clothes and travel documents from the 1920s. The conductor's cap, the blue scarf, the railway badge, all carefully arranged like museum exhibits. And there were more items I hadn't seen before, dozens of them, scattered throughout the waiting area like breadcrumbs leading towards some terrible revelation. The journal I'd found that morning was back on the counter, open to a different page. This entry was dated March 14th, 2019, the night before the last entry. I've been communicating with them. The previous custodian had written, "The ghosts are malevolent. They're desperate. They've been showing me fragments of the truth, pieces of a puzzle I'm only beginning to understand. The maintenance closet has been locked since 1972, since Jack Morrison vanished. But Morrison didn't just disappear. He opened something that should have stayed closed. The entity that emerged has been feeding on anyone who dies in the station, consuming their souls and trapping them here as energy sources. Eleanor Vance wasn't trying to hurt me when she reached out. She was trying to warn me. They all are. They want someone to set them free, to close whatever Morrison opened. Tonight, I'm going to try. There were no more entries after that. Whatever the previous custodian had attempted, it had gone wrong. They had either died in the attempt or fled and never came back. And now the station, the ghosts, possibly even the entity itself, wanted me to finish what they had started. I should have left right then. Should have walked out and never looked back. But as I stood there reading the journal, surrounded by artifacts of the dead, I felt something shift in the air around me. A presence, multiple presences, gathering close. The whispers started, but this time they were clear. Dozens of voices, speaking in unison, creating a chorus of desperation that echoed through the empty station. "Help us. Please. It hurts. We can't leave. Help us. End this. Please. On the ticket counter, papers began appearing, one by one, materializing out of nothing. Death certificates. Eleanor Vance, 1956. Jack Morrison, declared dead in absentia, 1979. Thomas Riley, the homeless man, 1989. And more, so many more. People who died in the station or nearby, all of them trapped here, all of them suffering. The final document made my blood turn to ice. It was a death certificate dated March 15th, 2019. Name, Christopher Webb, the previous night custodian. Cause of death, unknown. Location, Millbrook Station. He hadn't escaped. He died here, and now he was one of them. David. My name, spoken by that familiar feminine voice, Eleanor Vance. David, you have to listen. Against every instinct, against every rule I've been given, I spoke. I'm listening. The temperature in the station plummeted. Frost spread across the windows in intricate patterns, and the shadows began to take form, coalescing into human shapes that surrounded me in a circle. I could see them now, really see them for the first time. Dozens of spirits, men and women, and even children, all watching me with expressions of hope and desperation. Eleanor Vance stood directly in front of me, her blue dress rustling with a breeze I couldn't feel. Up close, I could see the trauma of her death written on her ghostly form, but her eyes held intelligence, awareness, and a terrible sadness. The rules were written to protect you, she said, her voice echoing strangely in the frozen air. To keep you safe from it, but they also keep us trapped. We can't act directly. We can only show you, guide you, hope that someone will finally understand. Understand what? My voice cracked. Another spirit stepped forward, an older man in work clothes. Jack Morrison, I realized. The maintenance worker from 1972. I was doing repairs, he said. Found a door hidden behind the water heater in the maintenance closet. Old door, older than the station, with symbols carved into it. I thought it was just historical building, weird foundation, something from before the station was built. I opened it. His form flickered, and for a moment, I saw him as he must have looked in life, solid and healthy. Then the image distorted, showing something else. A gaping darkness, a void that consumed light and warmth and life itself. Something came through. Morrison continued. Something old, hungry. It latched onto the station like a parasite, and it's been feeding ever since. Everyone who dies here, everyone who experiences strong emotions here, fear, sadness, desperation, it consumes them. We're trapped in its web. Our energy slowly drained away to nothing. The previous custodian tried to close the door, Eleanor added. Tried to seal it using instructions we gave him. But the entity was too strong by then. It killed him and added him to its collection. I looked around at the spirits, at the dozens of souls trapped in this nightmare. Why me? Why tell me this? Why not someone else? Someone who could actually do something? Because you follow the rules, a new voice said. Christopher Webb, the previous custodian, stepped through the circle of spirits. He looked younger than I'd expected, maybe 25, with kind eyes and an expression of profound regret. You survived where I failed. You were strong enough to resist when Eleanor appeared on the platform. You understand discipline, restraint. That's what's needed to close the door. Not strength, or weapons or power, just the ability to follow very specific instructions and not deviate, no matter what happens. He handed me a piece of paper that felt solid in my hands despite coming from a ghost. On it were written detailed instructions, steps for a ritual that would seal the door and cut off the entity's access to our world. It required 3 items currently in the station, a specific time, and absolute precision in execution. If you do this, Webb said, we can finally move on. The entity will be trapped on the other side, and this place can become just a building again. But if you fail, if you make even one mistake, you'll die. And you'll join us here, trapped forever. I stared at the instructions, my hands shaking. Everything in me screamed to drop the paper and run. But I looked at the faces surrounding me, at the hope and desperation in their ghostly eyes, and I knew I couldn't walk away. The ritual has to be performed in the maintenance closet, Webb explained. You'll need to break Rule 6. You'll need to enter the closet, open the hidden door, and perform the sealing while the entity is active. It will fight you every step of the way. When? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Tonight, Eleanor said quietly. It's strongest during your shift, between midnight and dawn. That's when it feeds. But it's also when it's most vulnerable, most connected to this world. Tonight is your 4th night. Tomorrow is your last contracted shift. After that, the entity will find someone new, and they probably won't be strong enough. You're the best chance we've had in years. I wanted to refuse. Every survival instinct demanded I refuse. But looking at these trapped souls, understanding the horror of their existence, I couldn't do it. I couldn't walk away and leave them here to suffer. What do I need to do first? I asked. Webb smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. Survive until midnight. Then we'll guide you through the rest. And David, thank you. Whatever happens, thank you for trying. The spirits faded, leaving me alone in the waiting area with the instructions clutched in my trembling hands. I had 5 hours until midnight. 5 hours to prepare for a ritual that would either free dozens of souls or add mine to their number. The station had never felt more alive or more dangerous, and I had just agreed to enter its heart, to face whatever horror lurked behind that hidden door. God help me, but I was actually going to try. The hours before midnight crawled by with agonizing slowness. I used the time to prepare, gathering the 3 items the ritual required. The pocket watch, which represented time and the moment of binding. The blue scarf, which Eleanor identified as belonging to the entity's first victim in 1923, a clerk who'd survived the fire but died months later under mysterious circumstances. And a railroad spike, forged from iron blessed by the station's original dedication ceremony. One of the few things the entity feared. Webb's instructions were precise and unforgiving. I had to enter the maintenance closet at exactly midnight, when the boundary between worlds was thinnest. I had to open the hidden door using the iron spike as a key, speaking words in a language I didn't recognize but that Webb had phonetically transcribed. Then I had to perform a binding ritual while the entity was active and aware, trapping it on the other side of the door before sealing it permanently. If I hesitated, if I mispronounced a single word, if I let fear control me, I would fail. And failure meant death. At 11:45 p.m., the spirits began gathering again, forming a protective circle around the station. I could feel their energy, a cold but somehow comforting presence that pushed back against the malevolence that permeated the building. They were lending me what strength they could, but beyond the maintenance closet's threshold, I would be alone. Remember, Webb said as I prepared to head to the eastern platform, the entity will try to stop you. It will show you things, terrible things, use your fears against you. It will offer you deals, promise you anything if you just stop the ritual. Don't listen. Don't look at what it shows you. Focus only on the instructions. Eleanor handed me the scarf, her ghostly fingers brushing mine in a touch that felt like ice water. This building has been a prison for too long. Whatever happens tonight, you've given us hope. That's more than anyone else has done in decades. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and walked toward the eastern platform. The door opened at my touch, revealing the long platform stretching into darkness. At the far end, barely visible in the moonlight, was the maintenance closet, the door I'd been instructed to never open, the door that held the key to everyone's freedom or my death. My footsteps echoed hollowly on the wooden platform as I walked toward it. The air grew colder with each step, and I could feel something watching me, could sense a vast and terrible intelligence focusing its attention on this one moment, this one person who dared to challenge it. The maintenance closet door was old wood, reinforced with iron bands, secured with a padlock that had rusted solid decades ago. But when I reached for it, the lock simply fell away, crumbling to dust at my touch. The entity was inviting me in. It thought it had already won. I pulled the door open and stepped inside. The closet was small, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, filled with old tools and maintenance equipment. A water heater sat against the back wall, exactly where Morrison had described. And behind it, just visible in the beam of my flashlight, was another door. This one was ancient. The wood was black with age, covered in symbols that hurt to look at, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. The door was slightly ajar, and from the gap came a sound like breathing, like the slow inhalation and exhalation of something massive. I checked my watch. 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes. I positioned myself in front of the door, arranged the items according to Webb's instructions, and pulled out the paper with the ritual words. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely read the text. 11:59 p.m. The breathing from beyond the door grew louder, faster, excited. The temperature dropped until my breath came in white clouds. The symbols on the door began to glow with a sickly green light. Midnight. I drove the iron spike into the gap between the door and frame, speaking the first words of the ritual. The language felt wrong in my mouth, syllables that shouldn't fit together, sounds that made my throat ache. But I pushed through, speaking each word with as much conviction as I could muster. The door exploded open. Darkness poured out. Not the absence of light, but something with substance and weight. A living shadow that filled the closet and reached for me with appendages that weren't quite tentacles and weren't quite hands. And within that darkness, I could see things. Faces, hundreds of faces, screaming silently, their features distorted by an agony that transcended physical pain. Stop. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating inside my skull, shaking my bones. You have no right. This place is mine. These souls are mine. The darkness took form, coalescing into something almost human-shaped but wrong in every proportion, every angle. It towered over me, filling the entire maintenance closet, and I understood with terrible clarity that what I was seeing was just a fraction of it, a small pseudopod of something vast and ancient that existed mostly beyond our reality. I offer you a choice, the entity said, and its voice was almost gentle now, almost kind. Walk away. Leave this place. I will let you go, unharmed, unremembered. You can have your life, your future, everything you want. All you must do is stop speaking those words. My mouth was open, the next phrase of the ritual ready on my tongue. The pocket watch in my left hand was ticking away the seconds, each one bringing me closer to either salvation or death. The blue scarf on my right hand felt impossibly heavy, as if it carried the weight of all the souls trapped here. You cannot win, the entity continued. I have existed since before your species learned to fear the dark. I have consumed thousands. We're a few dozen souls compared to my eternal hunger. Let them go. They're already mine. I saw a vision, then, projected directly into my mind. My apartment, my life, everything normal and safe. A future stretching out before me, free from this nightmare. All I had to do was stop. All I had to do was walk away. But I also saw something else. Eleanor Vance, throwing herself in front of a train because the entity had been feeding on her despair for months, whispering in her mind, driving her to that final, desperate act. Jack Morrison, opening the door out of innocent curiosity and dying in absolute terror as the entity claimed him. Christopher Webb, the previous custodian, trying to be a hero and ending up as just another ghost, just another source of food. And I saw all the others, everyone who had died in the station or near it. everyone who had been claimed by this thing. Dozens of lives, cut short or twisted into suffering, all to feed an endless hunger. No, I said, and continued the ritual. The entity shrieked, a sound that shattered the maintenance closet's single light bulb and made the walls tremble. The darkness surged forward, engulfing me, and suddenly I wasn't in the closet anymore. I was in my worst memories. Every failure, every loss, every moment of pain and humiliation, all played out simultaneously. I was 5 years old, watching my father leave and never come back. I was 13, standing by my mother's hospital bed as cancer took her away. I was 22, holding a rejection letter from the job I desperately needed, the one that would have prevented all the financial disasters that followed. The entity was inside my head, rifling through my past like files in a cabinet, using my own traumas against me. And it hurt. God, it hurt worse than anything physical ever could. But through the pain, I kept speaking the ritual words. My voice was barely a whisper now, breaking on every syllable, but I kept going. The spike in the doorframe began to glow with a red light, iron heated to forge temperature by the power of the ancient words. You will join them, the entity roared. I will keep you here forever. I will make you watch as I consume everyone you ever loved. New visions assaulted me. My few remaining friends, dying in horrible ways. My sister, who I hadn't spoken to in years, screaming my name as shadows consumed her. Everyone I'd ever cared about, suffering because of my actions here tonight. But I recognized the visions for what they were now. Lies. Desperate attempts to break my concentration. The entity was afraid. I wrapped the blue scarf around the spike, just as the instructions specified, and spoke the binding words. The scarf ignited, burning with a cold blue flame that spread to the door itself. The symbols carved into the ancient wood blazed with light, changing from sickly green to brilliant white. The entity's form collapsed in on itself, the darkness condensing, trying to retreat back through the door. But the ritual was working. I could feel it, could sense the binding taking hold, closing the gap between worlds. Wait, the entity's voice was diminished now, almost pleading. I can give you anything. Knowledge. Power. I can show you how to speak with the dead, how to see beyond the veil. I can make you rich, famous, anything you want. Just stop. Just let me stay. For a moment, I hesitated, not because I wanted what it offered, but because the final part of the ritual was the hardest. I had to place the pocket watch in the gap and speak the last word while looking directly at the entity, meeting its gaze without flinching. I pulled out the watch, its steady ticking a reminder that time was running out. My window for completing the ritual was narrow. If I didn't finish in the next 30 seconds, the binding would fail and I'd be trapped with an entity that would make my death last for eternity. I held the watch up, letting it dangle by a chain in front of the door. The entity's form writhed and twisted, trying to snatch it away. Faces appeared in the darkness, people it had consumed, screaming warnings or encouragements. I couldn't tell which. And then I saw him, Christopher Webb, his ghostly form standing just behind the entity, mouthing the final word I needed to speak. Eleanor was there too, and Morrison and all the others, lending me their strength, showing me I wasn't alone. I met the entity's gaze, a void within the void, an absence of existence that threatened to swallow my sanity, and spoke the final word of the ritual. My voice rang clear and strong, powered by something beyond my own strength, carrying the weight of every soul that wanted to be free. The pocket watch dissolved, its metal form transforming into pure light that flowed into the door's carvings. The symbols flared so bright I had to shield my eyes. The entity screamed one last time, a sound of rage and hunger and disbelief, and then it was gone, sucked back through the door with a sound like a massive inhalation in reverse. The ancient door slammed shut. The symbols on its surface pulsed once, twice, 3 times,
and then went dark. Dead. Sealed. The breathing sound was gone. The oppressive presence that had filled the station for decades evaporated like morning fog under sunlight. I collapsed against the water heater, gasping for breath, my entire body shaking with exhaustion and relief. The iron spike clattered to the floor, its purpose served. The blue scarf was gone, consumed by the ritual, and in the sudden silence, I heard something beautiful. Laughter. Soft, joyful laughter. I stumbled out of the maintenance closet on shaking legs. The eastern platform was filled with light. Not the harsh fluorescence of the station's electrical system, but a soft, warm glow that seemed to come from the spirits themselves. They were fading, finally able to move on, but they were smiling. Eleanor Vance stood at the edge of the platform, looking out at the railroad tracks with an expression of peace. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she was gone, dissolving into points of light that drifted up into the night sky. One by one, the others followed. Jack Morrison gave me a salute. Thomas Riley, the homeless man, nodded gratefully. Christopher Webb clasped my shoulder. I actually felt it, solid and real, and said, "You did it. You actually did it. Will they be okay?" I asked, "Where are they going?" "Somewhere better than here," Webb replied. "Somewhere they should have gone decades ago. You gave them that chance. You freed them." He began to fade, his form becoming transparent. "The station is clean now. Just a building. You can finish your shift in peace." As the last of the spirits vanished, taking their warm light with them, the station transformed. It was still old, still run down, but the oppressive atmosphere was gone. The shadows were just shadows. The creaking and groaning were just the sounds of old wood settling. It felt empty in a normal way, not the charged emptiness of a place between worlds. I made my way back to the office on unsteady legs. My watch showed 12:47 a.m. The entire ritual had taken less than an hour, though it had felt like a lifetime. I still had over 5 hours before my shift ended, before I could leave this place behind forever. I sat at the desk and noticed that all the artifacts were gone. The photographs on the wall now showed just normal historical images, no ghostly figures in the background. The items on the ticket counter had vanished. Even a mysterious suitcase had disappeared from a bench. The only thing remaining was the list of rules, still sitting in its manila folder. I picked it up and read through it one more time. Every rule had been designed to protect employees from the entity and its influence, to keep them from becoming victims like so many others. And now, because I'd broken Rule 6, because I'd opened a maintenance closet door, none of these rules were necessary anymore. I found a pen and wrote at the bottom of the page, "Threat neutralized. Station is safe. Rules no longer applicable." Final entry by David Torres. November 14th, 2025. The rest of my shift passed in peaceful quiet. I did my rounds more out of habit than necessity, checking windows and doors, making sure everything was secure. The building that had terrified me for 4 nights now felt almost friendly, as if it were grateful to finally be just a building again. As dawn approached, I stood on the eastern platform and watched the sunrise paint the Texas sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. In the distance, I could hear the highway coming to life, the sound of 18-wheelers and early commuters heading to work. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. My phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Jay Hartley, the mysterious employer I'd never met. The message was brief. "Thank you for your service at Millbrook Station. Due to the successful completion of facility remediation, the night custodian position is no longer needed. Please find attached your final payment, including a bonus for exceptional performance. The station will be closing permanently for historical preservation. We appreciate your dedication and discretion." Attached was a payment notification for $5,000, far more than I should have earned for 4 nights of work. Apparently, someone, somewhere, had known what this job really entailed and what it would cost me. I gathered my belongings and walked through the station one last time. In the morning light, it looked almost beautiful, a piece of history waiting to be preserved. Maybe someday it would open as a museum or event space, and people would walk through these halls without ever knowing what had happened here, what horrors had been trapped within these walls. As I reached my car, I turned back for one final look. In the second-floor window, for just a moment, I thought I saw a figure, a young man with kind eyes, raising his hand in a final farewell. Christopher Webb, I realized, checking one last time to make sure I made it out safe. I raised my hand in return, and then he was gone. Really gone this time, off to whatever waited beyond. I drove away from Millbrook Station as the sun climbed higher, leaving the building behind in my rearview mirror. I'd survived 5 nights, well, 4.5, in one of the most haunted places I'd ever heard of. I'd faced down an ancient entity and won. I'd freed dozens of trapped souls and closed a door that should never have been opened. But as I merged onto the highway, heading back toward my normal life, I couldn't shake one lingering thought. The entity had said it had existed since before humans learned to fear the dark. It had said it had consumed thousands. And while I'd sealed the door at Millbrook Station, while I trapped it on the other side, I hadn't destroyed it. Somewhere in the darkness beyond our world, it was still hungry, still waiting. And there were other doors, other thin places between worlds. How many of them were still open? How many other stations or buildings or forgotten places harbored similar threats? I pushed the thought away, told myself it wasn't my problem anymore. I'd done what I could. I'd saved who I could save. That had to be enough. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I find myself researching historical buildings, looking for patterns, for places where unexplained deaths cluster, where people vanish without reason. I tell myself it's just curiosity, just my mind trying to process what happened at Millbrook Station. But deep down, I know the truth. I know that if I found another place like that, another door that needed closing, another group of souls that needed freeing, I'd go, despite the fear, despite the danger, despite everything I'd been through. Because some doors need to be closed. Some rules exist for very good reasons. And sometimes, someone has to be brave enough or foolish enough to break the rules to set things right. I survived my shift at Millbrook Station, but I'll carry that experience with me for the rest of my life. A reminder that the world is stranger and darker than most people realize. And that sometimes, just sometimes, one person can make a difference, even in the face of ancient, inhuman evil. The station is closed now, sealed off, its secrets buried with its ghosts. But I have a feeling its story isn't quite over. Stories like this never really end. They just pause, waiting for the next chapter to begin. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I can still hear it. The soft, steady ticking of a pocket watch that no longer exists, counting down the seconds to something I can't quite see yet. But for now, I'm free. The ghosts are free. And Millbrook Station is just a building again, waiting silently in the Texas heat for whatever comes next. The end.